Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar on carbon market trends and insights for buyers. My name is Lena and I'm a Senior Business Development Manager here at South Pole. In my role, I work closely with clients navigating the often complex world of carbon credit procurement. And one thing I hear all the time from buyers is just how hard it is to keep up. Prices keep shifting, quality expectations are evolving as well, and it seems like every few months there's a new set of terms or guidance to wrap your head around. So we're running this session today to give you the latest insights on the market, what trends to watch, and how you can plan with more confidence. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. So first, everyone has joined on mute by default, so there's no pressure to keep the dog quiet or hide your coffee slurps. Just sit back and listen. And we'd love to also hear from you throughout the session, so please feel free to submit your questions in the question box at any time. We won't be answering them live today because we actually have received quite a few of your pre-submitted questions already during the registration process. So we'll aim to cover some of those first, but we will make sure to respond to all of your questions and we'll follow up with an email afterwards. So feel free to post your questions throughout the session. And finally, the session is being recorded and we will share the recording with you afterwards so you can revisit any of the content we'll be talking about today or share it with your colleagues if you wish to do so. One second. So we are very pleased to have with us here today Meiji Tan, who is Manager for International Research and Projects at the Carbon Market Institute, and Jiawei Lam, who is Carbon Markets Lead for Southeast Asia and India at MSCI. From South Pole, I'm joined by my colleagues Danielle Delacour, who is our Regional Senior Manager for Climate Projects in Australia, and Caroline Cesar-Diaz, who is Global Senior Director for Compliance Markets. And this is what we'll be covering in this webinar. So we'll first talk through key market trends, where Caroline will actually present the 3 key trends we are seeing in the Asia-Pacific market, and then we'll jump into an open discussion with Meiji and Jiawei to hear their respective perspectives as well. We'll then jump into a South Pole project, ArboRise, as a best practice climate project example, and that will then lead us into a discussion on quality and integrity, like how we approach it at South Pole using ArboRise as a practical example. And finally, towards the end of the webinar, we'll be answering some of your pre-submitted questions, but as mentioned before, please feel free to submit any further questions throughout the session, and we'll make sure to get back to you via email. I'll now hand over to Caroline to kick us off on the market trends section.
Thank you, Lena, and thank you to everybody online for joining us today. So over the next 5 minutes, I will share 3 major trends that are shaping the global carbon market today and that do have particular importance here for businesses in Asia Pacific. So the first trend that I would like to speak to is the expansion of regulated markets, and we see plenty of examples in the region. China, as you may have heard, is expanding its ETS to include steel, cement, and aluminum industries. That will require an additional 1,500 firms to purchase allowances to cover their emissions. We can assume that some of these covered entities will make use of the option to use offsets for up to 5% of their verified emissions. China has also announced that it will phase in a maximum cap as part of its ETS starting in 2027. Vietnam also is designing its ETS for iron, steel, cement, and thermal power facilities, and it's doing that concurrently with designing its procedures for Article 6. So it's expected that in the pilot phase of the Vietnam ETS until 2028, up to 30% of the ETS obligation could be met with carbon credits. And then Japan, to give you a last example, they're already using different instruments to price carbon. There's an existing carbon tax. There's a voluntary ETS, the GX League, that will evolve into a mandatory ETS from 2026. JCM credits and J credits will be eligible for use in the JX. And then separately, a carbon levy will be introduced from 2028 for fossil fuel importers and extractors. So governments in the regions are really increasingly putting a price on carbon. And that goes paired with a convergence of voluntary and compliance markets, which is really quite interesting. So you'll see so-called voluntary standards, carbon standards, that can be used for offsets for compliance purposes. We see that in Singapore, we see that for airlines and elsewhere. Some corporations are considering using the future credits issued by the new UN standard body, PACM, the Paris Agreement's crediting mechanism, for voluntary use. At the same time, we also expect governments to be quick to adopt PACM for compliance use. And then in parallel, you see growing alignment between the requirements of PACM and the voluntary standard bodies with an increasing conservative methodological approach. And that brings me to the second trend that I want to highlight today, and that is the flight to quality that we're seeing. The voluntary carbon market has faced scrutiny. The definition of integrity is evolving, and buyers are moving from beyond simply asking us for carbon credits to demanding high integrity carbon credits. That scrutiny is, of course, driven by initiatives like the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, the ICBCM, and also PACM, as already mentioned. PACM really is pushing the envelope to provide a robust UN-backed quality benchmark. And buyers also continue to seek credits from projects that not only reduce emissions, but that provide real social and environmental co-benefits, for example, in terms of protecting biodiversity, or empowering local communities. So that does make for a market where the focus shifts from quantity to a focus on quality. And the tendency is for projects to issue smaller volumes and incorporate increasingly demanding requirements for design, for monitoring, for reporting, for verification. That adds to the project transaction cost and to the price, but it does ultimately deliver greater credibility and value. And finally, I want to touch upon CBAM. The EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism is designed to prevent carbon leakage by ensuring that the carbon price of imported goods matches that of products made within the EU. The definitive phase is beginning in 2026, and so for companies in APAC, that is a matter of trade competitiveness, it is a matter of market access. A recent EU Commission proposal would introduce important flexibilities to ease the burden. There's a new exemption for small importers. There are simplified reporting requirements, and we do expect that proposal to be cemented into law in a few weeks' time. For producers here in APAC, it does mean that your EU-based customers will be demanding accurate, verified product-level emission data, and your competitiveness will depend directly on your ability to provide that information and to reduce your carbon footprint. So to conclude, the APAC carbon market is navigating national carbon pricing, it's navigating a demand for high integrity credits and new international policies like CBAM. And that really highlights the growing importance of credible climate action for businesses throughout the region. So we'll discuss that in much more detail with our panel, including insights from MSCI and from the Carbon Market Institute. And for that, I am handing back to Lena.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. So yeah, I would like to now welcome Jiawei and Meiji to speak, and we'll dive into the discussion part. I'll just stop sharing my screen so we can all see you a bit properly. So I'll start with you, Meiji. Building on from Caroline's presentation of the 3 key market trends in APAC, I understand you focus more on the international carbon market at CMI. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on what kind of international market drivers have you seen help shape the carbon market here in APAC?
Thanks, Lena. I think Caroline provided a very good overview just now. And if we look at the Asia Pacific region, comparing the picture 5 years ago and today, we realize that a whole range of carbon pricing instruments are emerging in the Asia Pacific region, especially in Southeast Asia or ASEAN countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, and Malaysia. While we also see that compliance markets like the Australian safeguard mechanism, the South Korean ETS and Chinese ETS continue to mature and expanding their scope. I think there are many factors that have contributed to this positive trend that we are seeing. The first one being we are now in the era of the Paris Agreement, where countries have their own climate targets or NDC to meet, and carbon market is generally seen as an effective and efficient tool to put a price on carbon emissions. And there are already so many learning models that they can learn from the region. For example, the safeguard mechanism in Australia has been operating for nearly 10 years since 2016, has now been transformed into a baseline and credit system where the baselines are declining at an annual rate of 4.9%. So there are so many learning models that countries can borrow their experience from. But the most important driver, like Caroline mentioned just now, has to be the EU CBAM introduced in 2021. Because like 5 years ago, basically there are very few countries that are implementing their own national ETS, but starting next year, goods exported into the EU from this region will be imposed a carbon price that is equivalent to the EU ETS allowance price if they are not being charged a carbon price in their producing countries. This announcement is definitely one of the reasons we are seeing the momentum in Asia Pac. And although there's a lot of pushback from countries like China and Vietnam, which are main exporters into the EU, but at the same time, these countries are also working on their own national ETS to align with the EU ETS, hopefully to keep some of the revenue within their jurisdictions. I will pause here, Lena.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maisie. Now maybe one for you, Joey. As we heard from Caroline earlier, voluntary and compliance markets are increasingly converging. So the question I have for you is, from your perspective, what data points are becoming most important for companies to track in a world of converging voluntary and compliance markets?
Thanks, Lena, for the question, and Caroline for the introduction. I think from our perspective, we we do see that there is definitely a convergence and a growing convergence between the VCM space and compliance markets. As mentioned by some of the panelists earlier, Article 6 is one big trend, right? So that enables countries to trade ITMOs, and going forward, as VCM projects become more robust, they could be accepted into compliance eligible schemes or credits when they meet Article 6 requirements. And of course, credits under Article 6, also some of them do have corresponding adjustments, when considering country NDC targets. So as that 6.4 becomes more prevalent, we will see that greater convergence. I think on a broader level, SBTI and ICBCM are also pushing for more robust credit quality and transparency, and that will align VCM credits to the rigors of various compliance schemes. And I think also referencing some sovereign strategies. So an example here is Singapore's carbon tax, which similarly allows VCM credits to play a role in taxable emissions for up to 5%. So things like that are examples of trends where on a regional level and on a regulatory level, we do see a definite sort of convergence. And I think that is a good thing, because that fungibility between compliance schemes and VCMs could enhance liquidity, right? And sort of drive project finance and investment into sort of higher quality projects, which is, I think, what we all hope to see as well. And I think going forward as well, we will see more VCM credits get compliance eligible statuses. So whether they're tagged as, Article 6 approve or some jurisdictional approval, and that I think also helps to put a spotlight on technology's role, where countries will have to sort of monitor, their registries, maybe implement an MRV system in order to sort of track these changes and implement these changes over time. So I think the convergence is definitely a positive sign and something that we foresee will happen in the future.
Okay, great. And I'll follow up with another quick one for you, Jaiwei. We often hear about a flight to quality, and it's also something that Caroline mentioned earlier as one of the key trends. So how do you see this trend show up in your market data and analysis?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting term. We hear that a lot. I mean, essentially, it's a market signal. There's a growing trend among corporates and buyers to sort of look for higher quality credits, that are more credible, that have higher veracity, more trustworthy, as opposed to just off-taking or retiring credits that are low cost and fulfill some sort of easy target, right? And that also kind of runs the risk of greenwashing these days, and reputational risks, where if a project might have certain hidden risks that are not properly studied, not properly flagged out, and so I think that signals a shift within the buying community that integrity of credits is of high significance and value going forward. And we do see that in credit types such as CDR, some nature-based removals, right? And some blue carbon projects, just to name a few. I think with our interactions with buyers, we do see that there are a few risk factors or pertinent factors that they look out for, namely additionality, right? Permanence, whether the carbon removed or avoided, has a, continues to stay out of the atmosphere in the long term. They are also looking at quantification or, measuring methods where buyers prioritize more transparent, rigorous science-based methods with good monitoring and verifications. And of course, buyers also look at leakage as well as co-benefits that are being accrued by the project beyond just the removal and reduction of carbon from the atmosphere. So especially for nature-based projects, biodiversity is also a thing that buyers are looking out for, whether it has sort of these additional benefits for the environment. So I do see that there has been a shift where buyers are focusing on more higher integrity credits, beyond just the fact that they're registered with a Verra or Gold Standard.
Great to hear. So on the same topic, maybe to you, Caroline, when we talk about the flight to quality, what does this mean for a developer like Southpole?
Thanks, Lena. And yes, it gets really interesting for developers. To make sure a credit is high integrity, a project undergoes quality checks throughout the entire project lifecycle, right? From planning and design all the way to certification, the MRV, issuances, transfer. The introduction of new quality frameworks like CCP labels and like the regulatory integrity requirements from sovereign buyers, for example, it does add a few layers of complexity. And we find ourselves typically juggling different sets of quality and integrity requirements on project design, on emission reduction estimations, on MRV. If you take an Article 6 project, we'd have to meet expectations from the buy-side regulator, from the host country, and from the standard body. So it really is a constant triangulation between three different frameworks that are defining quality and integrity. If I go to the example of the solar taxi project that we are running in Ghana, it's a project aiming for the large-scale deployment of e-motorcycles, and it's being developed under the bilateral agreement between Sweden and Ghana for Article 6. And so there, some of the features include a conservative baseline, a conservative below BAU baseline that has to be approved by the Ghanaian Ministry of Transport and Environment. We work with conservative grid emission factors that are aligned with the host countries reporting to the UN. We have to align with national priorities that needs to get confirmed by the Ministry of Environment, by the Ministry of Transport. We are using emergent packing requirements like the Sustainable Development Tool and the baseline standard. We are going for digital MRV. We do additional financial additionality testing through an investment analysis that's required by the Swedish government, the buyer, and that exceeds the requirements of the methodology from gold standard. So that kind of complexity really drives up transaction costs, and our buyer is aware of that. It results in less credits for a higher price, but we do know that it's a project that our clients can be very proud of.
Okay, thank you. Now let's just talk a little bit more about the carbon markets, more specifically in the APAC region. So I have a question for you, Meiji. You know, we know that the APAC carbon market landscape is highly fragmented, with different countries using various different pricing mechanisms like pricing carbon taxes, ETS, or also different voluntary schemes. And how does CMI believe this fragmentation impacts the overall efficiency of the market, but also the scale of the regional market? Like, what role are you playing in fostering greater alignment?
Thanks, Lena, for your questions. I do agree that fragmentation is a problem we are seeing right now when many countries in Asia-Pac are taking this hybrid approach. That simply means that a country will implement an ETS together with a domestic crediting mechanism like the CCER in China or the ACCUs in Australia, along with a voluntary carbon market, which maybe already existing in the country, and maybe they will also participate in Article 6 markets. So there are at least 4 markets in a single country, being the ETS, the domestic crediting mechanism, the VCM, and also Article 6. This is if there's no subnational level kind of carbon markets in the country. Comes with how many countries we have in Asia-Pac. So that is a headache itself to think about, and can cause confusion for many market participants. But when we think about the rationale why governments want to have their own crediting mechanisms or carbon markets instead of using those existing ones, we'll understand because many of these countries are seeing carbon markets as a financing tool that's able to mobilize private capital into carbon projects. So it is not surprising that these governments would want to take ownership or sovereignty over this process. But over time, the implications of fragmentation that we are seeing on exchanges is low liquidity and low trading volumes. So that actually prevents a strong carbon pricing signal from being formed that will encourage companies to decarbonize, which is the first, at the first place, is the key objective why governments in Asia-Pacific regions are setting up their carbon markets. But I think over time, we are seeing that a lot of the governments in this region, because of the fragmentation issues that we mentioned and the low liquidity and the weak carbon pricing signal, they are starting to working together right now. And to solve some of the problems that fragmentation by aligning in the areas where they can, it is not easy to come up with a regional carbon markets, but we start to see these positive trends where governments are talking with each other. And normally this initiative is driven by the private sector and led by carbon market associations like CMI in this region. And we saw private initiative like the ASEAN Common Carbon Frameworks that's emerging in Southeast Asia. I think all these are very positive trends. for governments to step up and work together. But like I said, it is still a private sector-led initiative. So CMI will continue to monitor. And one of the areas where these associations are working on right now is by sharing their resources and talent pools for capacity building. And this the area where CMI we are increasingly doing with our counterparts in the region like Vietnam and Indonesia.
Great. Thank you all very much. I think this is where we'll need to end this discussion. But yes, thank you so much, Maisie, Tiawe, and Caroline for sharing your insights. Now that we've talked about the big picture dynamics shaping the market, let's look at what this means on the ground. So I'll now hand over to Danny as she dives into a best practice project example. So over to you, Danny.
Thanks, Lena, and hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. If you don't know me, I'm Danielle. I'm a senior manager in our climate projects team, and I'm here to share the story of this project that my incredible colleagues are involved with. Oh, I'm just checking if Lena has the slides up. So today, I'd love to take on a journey to Upper Guinea, where our team has been working with some of the local communities on a project called ArboRise. And if you picture this, land that was once a thriving forest is now bare and degraded. And for local families in this region, it has real consequences. So it affects their crops, their water, their way of life. So ArboRise was born from the simple idea to reforestation only works when we allow communities to lead the way. And it's a partnership between 3 organizations. So ArboRise, which is a Swiss non-profit driving the initiative. We have Guidre, which is a local NGO providing that deep knowledge of rural development, and Asset South Pole supporting with the carbon expertise and long-term project management. And together, the goal of the project is to fight climate change through community-led reforestation while restoring biodiversity, creating livelihoods, and raising awareness about the importance of forests. So where exactly is this happening? If you travel about 750 kilometers from Conakry, the capital of Guinea, you'll reach the Can-Can region, where communities depend on the land for farming and survival. And when we choose to plant in these regions, we do it quite carefully. So we have the fertile lowlands called the Bas Fonds, which are really crucial for things like rice farming, and those are allocated specifically to agricultural productivity, so we don't plant there. Instead, we focus on couture, which is the hillsides and the gently sloping areas where some of the trees once stood. And what makes ArboRise truly special is its participatory model. So communities aren't just involved, they're at the heart of the project. We begin with seed families. So these mostly are made up of women who collect around 20,000 seeds each per year from about 40 native tree species, and this gives them a steady income and recognition for their vital knowledge. The seeds from across the villages are mixed to ensure diversity and then reintroduce species that have been lost through deforestation. And then come the field families. So these are landowners who make unused or degraded land available for reforestation, and each commits to restoring 6 hectares over a 3-year cycle while keeping full ownership of their land and trees. And to support them, we have community management committees, which have been formed in every village. So, bringing together those local leaders, including women, to share practices and guidance, and to ensure that the benefits last. Families are building a cooperative to manage revenues from the credits, and 75% of that goes directly to the community. So ArboRise grows in 3-year cycles, involving around 25 villages with across 500 families and across 1,500 hectares. We started the project in 2021 in Linko, where around 26 villages restored about 1,600 hectares. And from 2025 to 2027, we're expanding to Damaro for another 1,500 hectares. And then over 4 cycles, the project will scale to 100 villages across 2,000 families and more than 6,000 hectares. So step by step, community by community. What does this all add up to? From an environmental perspective, over 1.1 million tons of carbon dioxide will be sequestered over 30 years. Plus, there's restoration in biodiversity, protecting water and soils, and then new wildlife corridors. From a social perspective, increase in jobs and income, so stronger community governance and recognition for the vital role that women play in that seed collection and stewardship. And then economically, the generation of the credits, which allows the revenue to flow back to the families and communities that make this possible. So in short, it's about creating a more resilient and adaptive future for the people of Upper Guinea, but also creating nature positive benefits for the environment. So we spoke about integrity earlier, and everything I've just shared about ArboRise is exciting, but for projects like this to truly have impact, they do need to have a more compelling story. They need to be built on strong foundations of integrity, and that's something we take incredibly seriously at South Pole. And we approach this integrity through 3 key pillars. So in terms of those robust foundations across standards, so all of our projects follow international standards like Gold Standard and Vera. And then on top of that, we've developed our own internal quality framework that Carolyn mentioned earlier. This is managed by our risk team and informed by 20 years of on-the-ground experience across more than 1,000 projects. We also follow the 5 core quality criteria that align with some of that ICVCM and CCP. So every project is assessed against these criteria. We look at additionality, ensuring the project wouldn't have happened without the carbon finance, the carbon accounting, so making sure the emissions reductions are accurately measured, conservatively measured, permanence, so assessing whether the emissions reductions are long lasting, the social and environmental safeguards, so protecting the communities and ecosystems, and the co-benefits, so looking at the additional positive impacts like job creation or biodiversity conservation. So this really gives us a consistent benchmark for quality across our portfolio. And then in terms of risk and transparency, so every project goes through a 9-step risk assessment process covering things like governance, delivery, legal, financial, reputational risks. We run full KYC and compliance checks through third-party databases, supporting independent third-party ratings to drive transparency, and then openly sharing project integrity summaries from our assessments with buyers and stakeholders. So what does this actually look like on the ground? We've spoken about ArboRise in practice, and the project has really been designed from the very beginning to embed these integrity principles into its DNA. So from the standards and independent oversight, the project is developed under the gold standard ARR, or afforestation reforestation method. It does undergo third-party validation and verification, so things like on-site audits to confirm survival rates, planting progress, the carbon accounting framework, and then the results and documentation are made publicly available to ensure that ongoing transparency and credibility. Adaptive permanence management, so this is quite important. Permanence on the project in terms of the success of the project is managed as an ongoing responsibility. So those risks identified and addressed through that active local participation. Each village has established and maintains fire breaks as part of the annual work plans. Families receive, fire management bonuses that are linked to things like patrols, prevention activities, and monitoring. We have environmental education programs that run to strengthen that local knowledge on fire risk and sustainable land management. And these measures are reviewed regularly and updated through feedback from those local committees and the monitoring results. Carolyn mentioned earlier around the conservative carbon accounting. So, we ensure that the project has accuracy in its project accounting in line with the method requirements through monitoring of the baseline and of the project trees through the duration of the project. 2 other important things is around social safeguards and governance. So, all land included is only with free and prior and informed consent from those landholders and those communities. Grievance mechanisms are in place through officers and toll-free hotlines supported by those village committees. And the project also ensures equal pay and training for men and women to create that gender balance across all of the local governance committees. And then from a community ownership and benefit sharing perspective, this is very important specifically for our buyers that are buying the credits. You know, we have a cooperative made of 26 villages that has been established to manage that carbon revenue, and then 75% of the value flows directly back to those participating families, and they collectively decide how they reinvest those funds. So that ensures, you know, long-term local ownership, accountability, and then investment into the benefits. So this combination of, you know, using the standards, things like adaptive permanence planning, how we conservatively account for the carbon, and then the strong community governance ensures that ArboRise doesn't just meet the standard, goes beyond, so embedding that credibility, the resilience, and equity into every step of the design and delivery. So before we move on to the last part of the webinar, I'll just take a moment here to pose another poll to everyone in the audience. And the question is, you know, how confident are you in your ability to assess carbon credit quality today? Great, a good mix. About 50% is not confident. So hopefully the market is moving towards changing that slowly but surely. We still have a bit of work to do in terms of that confidence piece, and I think that relies on all market participants, both from the supply side and the buy side, to ensure that we can enhance that from both ends. Now I'll hand over back to Lena.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. I'm back. Thank you so much for jumping in as well and sharing the slides. My computer had the best timing of crashing. So yeah, so now we're almost actually at the end of the session, but before we move into Q&A, I wanted to quickly recap what we've heard today and leave you also with 3 tips for buyers navigating this fast evolving market. So we're really seeing the APAC region step up as a key player in global climate action. Across the region, we've got new regulations coming in from China to Vietnam, as we heard before, that are also really pushing voluntary and compliance markets closer together. And on top of that, we have international policies like CBAM that are core, you know, that make carbon management really a core part of doing business and staying competitive. And all of this really points to a market that's maturing quickly, and also where integrity, transparency, and also high quality credits are no longer just a nice to have, but they're really becoming more and more of a must have. So what does this mean for you as buyers? First, we recommend to build a diversified portfolio. Now, we've talked a lot today about the pace of change across APAC and globally, and no single project type, country, or credit category can really cover all risk and opportunities. So a diversified mix across avoidance and removal projects, across geographies, and also across standards can give you both the flexibility and also the resilience you need as the market develops. And second, lock in future supply. We're already seeing demand for high integrity projects outpace supply in some areas, and prices are expected to rise as well as market confidence grows, especially for high integrity nature-based projects. And by entering into longer term offtake agreements, you can secure supply at predictable prices, but while also helping projects actually access the upfront funding they need to scale and to make sure that these projects exist for you when you need them. And finally, enhanced transparency and reporting. Being open about how you assess and select projects will build trust. It also helps you get ahead of potential regulation, and it reduces the risk of greenwashing. We are at a pivotal moment for carbon markets, and the work both private and public institutions are doing is critical. The challenges of scaling the markets are real, but I believe with strong policy, transparent data, and a commitment to high integrity projects, we can build a credible and effective market to build future demand. With that being said, let's finish up by addressing a few of your questions as well. So the first question I have here on my list is, what happens if the project against which credits are issued is shut down? Danny, would you like to answer this one?
Thank you. And I liked how that question was framed, straight to the point. It's a great question. It's something, you know, carbon standards plan for very carefully. So first, there's what's called reversal risk. So this is the risk that, you know, the carbon stored or reduced by a project gets released back into the atmosphere. So for example, if a forest burns in a wildfire or is cleared illegally or is hit by disease, and to manage this, you know, the standards have got quite conservative in terms of how they manage this. So they have a system called a buffer pool. So when a project issues credits, a portion of the credits are set aside and not sold, and they go into a shared reserve across all of the projects, like an insurance pool. So if the project is destroyed or shut down, you know, or something happens, the registry retires credits from this buffer pool to make up for the lost carbon. So this means buyers keep that climate benefit for what they paid for, even if something happens to the original project. And then on top of that, we're seeing a lot of emergence in carbon insurance products. You know, these give buyers a direct financial backstop if a reversal event occurs. It's still quite new, but it's something that is becoming more common. So in short, you know, if something happens on a project, the credits don't just disappear. The system replaces them through the buffer pool or potentially through these new products in the market.
Okay, thank you, Danny. And now I have a question for Caroline. What is your understanding of the influence thus far of the Paris Agreement's Article 6.2 and 6.4 carbon trading mechanism on defining high quality credits?
Thanks, Selena. Very, very good question. PACM, so the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism under 6.4, like I mentioned before, is pushing a very conservative approach in its standards. For example, they've introduced the principle of downward adjustments to baselines to prevent overcrediting risk. They set ambitious benchmarks on emission reductions. Financial additionality is becoming the norm, in addition to requirements around regulatory additionality. They are extremely demanding on permanence, and you may have seen the debate around that flaring up in the press right now. There are requirements around 2% automatic cancellations, 5% adaptation contributions. So what we see is that other standard bodies are exploring similar approaches. Gold Standard has announced that they are updating their requirements relating to baseline setting and additionality testing. Verra is looking into standardizing a 5-year crediting period for non-AFOLU projects. Is also looking at baselines below the BAU, the business as usual. I think what will be key here is to see whether or not standard bodies maintain some flexibility to adapt to realities of different countries, of different policies, of different project types. And I would expect to see some healthy competition between the standard bodies, but around those agreed principles of what it means to be really Paris aligned.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for, but as mentioned, if you have sent in any questions that we didn't get to today, we will be responding to those questions via email. So great, that brings us to the end of today's session. A big thank you to our fantastic speakers from MSCI and CMI, Jaiwei and Meiti, and also to my colleagues Danny and Caroline for sharing their insights. We hope you found the discussion useful. You know, if you'd like to stay updated, we regularly share market insights, and we'll also be releasing our Q3 carbon market trends report in October. So keep an eye out for that. And you can always connect with us through our website or sign up for our newsletter to be kept in the loop. And yeah, thank you again for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you at one of our next webinars. Thank you.